Yeah.
you know, to go astray. Yeah. And any other content. So even before our meeting, ahead of our meeting, so that I can submit, you can also submit the same.
Okay.
Yeah, so that I can just send everything all at once. I'm planning to do that as soon as I get back home. So that's on Tuesday. So I'm going to ship off everything.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm sorry you can't stay for too long.
No worries.
Got another
Shots and shots.
my sister around.
Oh, that's
She's
nice.
really curious to watch a film.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But you've got my contact.
Yes.
My number is also my WhatsApp number. So let's talk.
Perfect.
Right?
Okay.
All right.
Cheers,
Take
guys.
care. Bye.
Well done. Keep going.
So you, I was just, I heard Shalom House, huh?
Yeah. DocuBox is here. We are just first floor.
Nice.
I'm from on the first floor. I mean, basically, I didn't want us to move. When they proposed me the job, when I came to Nairobi, we spent like 7 months, me and Josh and Jackie, the administrator from DocuBox, trying to clear up the mess of the previous team. And then I said, okay, there's DocuBox here, we'll just stay here.
Yeah. That's not good.
It's a Twitter. So now the space, the board, it's like it's all now like and he's refused to delete. So yeah, like I'm done with the film.
This is the Bonnie show now.
Yeah, it's
So,
How's Steven?
he's good. I got a message from him. He's like, "When's awards night?" I'm like, "Stephen, calm down." Calm down.
to sell.
Yeah, he does.
Okay, like
That's what it is.
producer wants to sell.
Wants to start, of course.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the first ever in-person Manyaka Talks that we're very happy to have in beautiful Zanzibar at ZIP. I'm going to ask you all to maybe come a little bit closer, seeing it's such a nice intimate setting. Please grab some coffee if you haven't already, some dates, and have a seat. It is my absolute extreme pleasure to introduce to you the very illustrious Amil Shivji, the ever illustrious Soko, and the ever illustrious Mohamed Ouma, all of who are going to be having a conversation moderated by Mohamed on filmmaking, their respective very illustrious careers, and how they feel about East African cinema, and then there'll be a little gush fest. Probably be some questions should you choose, but enjoy the conversation, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
So much.
Thank you. Thank you, Awal. Good evening, everybody. I know there are people online as well. So before we start this, I would like to take this opportunity to thank Manyata Screenings. I think Awa didn't talk about Manyata Screenings, what we do, but They do screenings, live screenings, online screenings because of COVID in Eastern Africa, in Kenya, Uganda, and other parts of Eastern Africa. So I'm really pleased to have this conversation with my dear friends Sam and Amil. And before we start this conversation, I would like to introduce you to Sam and Amil. So Sam is a documentary filmmaker. He's based in Nairobi, Kenya, and he's got an approach to socio-political storytelling, and he's been developing content and has been collaborating with artists from Kenya, from the continent, but globally as well. We'll be talking a little bit about collaboration on a global stage, but also in Eastern Africa during this panel. His first feature documentary, Softy, that he produced, he wrote, and he directed it, tell the story of a family man and who has a deep love for his country and has premiered at Sundance and received a special jury award for editing. That was 2020 Sundance edition, Sam, if I remember. Sam has received Emmy, Peabody, and PGA nomination for his work. He's an outspoken defender of freedom of expression and has taken part in global conversations on making media matter when the world is on fire. Sam has funded with a partner LBX Africa, and it's a Kenyan production company, and they works with local and international filmmakers, and they want to bring forward African perspectives to global audiences. So welcome, Sam, to this panel. And we have Amil, because we do have a non-Tanzanian crowd here. I have to introduce Amil. He's a superstar here. But I will have to introduce you. There's like 4 pages of description. I just read the first
It's
page.
fine, don't worry about it.
Amil is based in Tanzania, his homeland, as a freelance filmmaker and former lecturer at the University of Dar es Salaam. He believes in using images to challenge the powers that be, in particular deconstructing urban facade of development and emphasizing the strengths and struggles of marginalized communities. Amil has set up an independent production house called Kijiweni Production that is committed to telling local stories with international standard. He has written, directed, and produced a few short fictions that have addressed issues that goes from corruption and land grabbing to commentary on the growing class divide here in Zanzibar, but also in Tanzania, in mainland Tanzania. This is very, I want to be politically correct. They have received worldwide recognition. He has participated in lots of festivals, Rotterdam, FESPACO in Burkina Faso, and has received many awards, including People's Choice Award in Zanzibar for Best Director and Best Short Film. His first feature film that he produced, wrote, and directed was Aisha, that came out in 2015, I believe, and has been screened in LA, in Seattle, in Washington, in Toronto, in Singapore, and has picked up lots of awards here at this festival in ZIF in 2016, 4 awards, if I'm correct. It's good. He has directed, it's very good. His first feature film was Teen Junction. It opened at ZIF 2017. And he also produced and wrote his latest feature film, Vuta Nkuvute, Tug of War, that opened this festival and received the famous and very prestigious award at FESPACO 2021 Umaru Ganda Prize and a special jury prize in Seattle. Thank you, Amil, for participating in this. So let's go straight to this matter, and then I want to ask you just a simple question. What drives you to tell a story using film as a technique? Sam?
So that it doesn't feel like a weird interview. Good evening, everyone. What drives? It's a broad question.
Yeah, maybe let's just narrow it down to, you know, when did you realize that you're going to become a filmmaker?
I think I'm, in many ways, I'm an accidental filmmaker. I started my engagement in the art and storytelling in theater, and but the thing I loved in theater was storytelling, was the idea of communicating what seemed to be complex, what seemed to be difficult to comprehend, and what even seemed to be basic. That it's so beautiful when people engage with an idea and end up leaving and kind of deciphering things and implementing them as if it was their own idea at that particular moment. And I think the power of cinema is that. The power of cinema is you can be in a room with 100 people and they each get something different and they each engage with something different. And getting deeper into that, I think that's the joy I find in documentary, because the thing about working with documentaries, you're working with real people, with, you know, there are real engagements, real situations, real emotions, and you are just a vessel of what they're feeling and what they're going through and the journeys that they're engaging with in life. So I think for me, that's what keeps me going, and that's what inspired me in the first place, is the power that has in engaging with the world, in engaging with other people, and even engaging with something as intimate as within families, and them being able to react and feel a certain level of ownership in what is taking place.
Thank you, sir. Amil?
What was the question?
Question is, you know,
So I got so wrapped into what Sam was saying.
Let's repeat the question.
Yeah.
What drives you in when did you realize that you want to become a filmmaker?
Well, I'm still figuring that out. I'm still figuring it out. No, it's true. Good afternoon, good evening, everybody. It's been a long day. There's a sense of fear every time I start a project. Doesn't matter whether it's, you know, Vutan Kuvute or this year in 2019 or it was Shushan in 2012. There's always this huge fear and confusion and an anxiety. And I always think, like, why? Where does it come from? And why is it that every time I make a film, it comes back to me? And it's because I'm not sure if I'll be able to make the movie. And I'm not talking financially, I'm not talking about a crew and a cast. It's actually me as Amil. Can I do this? Can I make a film? Can I tell a story? And I think that comes from the fact that being a filmmaker, when you tell stories, you never fully grasp the amount of work it takes until you're in it and at the end of it, right? And the amount of collaboration you go through and the people that you work with. So I'm still figuring it out. I'm still figuring out what am I in the filmmaking process, because I've directed, I've produced, I've written. I get excited by different departments all the time. And now with like visual arts and virtual reality and impact producing exhibitions and screenings, I'm still trying to place myself. And I'm having more fun figuring it out than actually deciding what part I want to do. So, you know, that being said, when I started by just writing. It was simply, I'm obsessed about writing. I love writing. I love expressing what's happening in here with pen and paper. And then I went to film school, also accidentally, a complete accident. It's a long story, I won't get into it. But the thing that kept me going, the thing that made me realize that this was a medium, it was a format that I fell in love with and I found extremely revolutionary, was the fact that African cinema that has existed from the 60s until the 80s, and then it dropped and then got picked up again. It's been doing something that that has impact till today. You show a Usman Semben film or you show a Mambeti film today, it will still bring crowds, it will cause discourse, it will It will excite the mind, and it will cause you to think and debate and bring up new ideas and produce knowledge. And for me, that just felt like that was the calling. That was what I wanted to do. I wanted to do it through writing, but I said, here's a format that reaches the masses. And by seeing that, I almost felt like becoming a filmmaker was it's a beautiful romantic concept, but it's also such a responsibility because you're presenting communities and people, and you have to do them justice, their struggles, their strengths, their weaknesses, their love, their everything that they do as humans, right? So I'm still trying to figure that out about the whole filmmaker thing, but I think I like to look at it, and Sam and I were talking about it yesterday. When I make my films or when I write my stories, it's not activism, but it's just really building communities. I see it as building communities. Filmmaking is building communities and working with communities. So every film that I make, wherever it is in the world or wherever it is in Tanzania, I will go and I will live there and I will stay there for as long as it takes for that community to accept me and accept me to be part of their everyday life, to tell that story. And even when we go and make the film, they're very much part and parcel of the filmmaking process. Even when we go back for exhibition, when we go back for impact producing, impact screenings, it's so much more than just, these words that we're using. It's really them owning their stories and their film and this film. And there's no other feeling like it, There's really no other feeling. And I think when I've been seeing those exhibitions, that's when it's almost like backwards for me. That's when I realized that, okay, this is my call. This is a film. This is what I want to keep doing. But not necessarily in the director's seat all the time or the producer's seat, but being part of this process where, especially in our context, we've been robbed of those spaces for so long. To be able to be part of this movement and this really exciting way to engage people has been very, very cool for me. And I know that this is definitely how I want to proceed with telling stories.
You talk about the challenges, and we will come back to the challenges, but when you started, like almost 15 years ago, so you have like...
It's not that long, man.
It is. I mean, you have a career. You have a career. But you guys, when you started, because this is quite focused on Eastern African and Eastern Africa. What were the challenges when you started? And those challenges are still there? Do you think they're still there? Or do you think you've managed to, at least if they're still there, did you manage to grasp them better? Do you understand them better?
I think even using the word challenge, challenge has weight. Challenge means there was something, but there was problems. When we started, there was nothing. Particularly in documentary, I keep telling this story of how the first time someone told me that people fundraise for documentaries, I was like, where? Because it wasn't a thing. Because for me, even watching, I remember watching, there's a documentary called Nostalgia for the Light. And Patricia Guzman, yeah. And I watched it, and this was, I think, in 2010, 2011, and I was like, oh my God, who does this? This is so amazing. There's no way we would ever make anything like this. It was a sudden level. It was the moon. It was Mars. And there was no one to have that conversation with. Because there was nowhere to look. We were barely, it was a time we were still going to internet cafes to see what's going on in the world. The concept of documentary, not only to me, but those around me, was the NGO work, which was, still with a limited few, because we're talking about a time where people are still filming on tapes and beta cams and DV cams, where the best, you'll be so happy to just get a job that is dabbing the tape to digital, which is the worst job anyone can give you. Because you have to be there until the tape is run over, and the tape is, these tapes are like 60 minutes each, and someone gives you, 10, 20 tapes. That means that you're not going anywhere. You're just there waiting for it to run. And in that existence, it will be like, why would you do this job? And in your mind, you imagine there are people before you who used to cut the work, who used to, when you tell them you need to do a change, would be like a scary thing. So for me in particular, getting into the space was having to deal with a deep the environmental noise that tells you this is nothing, move on. You know, having to hear your parents, your friends, your relatives waiting for this fad to go, you know, and be like, you know, the university is hiring. You could you could be a teacher. You know, even this accounting thing is not bad. You could at least sustain yourself. You could make these things you do on the side. And my parents, for the longest time, used to tell people I used to make. There's a very popular TV show in Kenya called Your Jamaa Kamani, which is it's a sitcom. It's like a court drama. It's been there forever. So whenever anybody would tell them what do I do, they'll be like, he does this Vioja things. Because even for them, they couldn't grasp what we were trying to do. So if at home you're feeling that, and now with all the knowledge of everything that exists outside, the lack of infrastructure, the lack of money, the lack of technical capacity, the lack of mentorship, the lack of information, it's nothing. So that space and where we are now is very different. And I have to acknowledge that. And I have to acknowledge that even having this conversation is different. Being in a space where we're filmmakers who've been part of producing work that has been made by other African filmmakers in spaces that we are familiar with. That's amazing, you know? Because before that wasn't there. And going through the journeys and using these journeys to have those conversations, like even before we speak of the challenges, I think we have to acknowledge that leap that has taken place. And it in that recognition, one, I think, we're like, huh, we've come from far. But it's first with that recognition, then now we move to a conversation of how do we actually build foundations that are beneficial for our future, that are beneficial to us consistently, so that our work is sustainable. Because a really big challenge that was there before, a really big problem, was the people who were there before us, because of how the hell they had to go through to execute what they had to execute, they did not have gas to talk to us. Yeah, it was like, huh? Why do I have to be the mentor? So it's I think at this point, the challenge for me that's different from that time is how do we build a sustainable industry and community that we are not only involved in, but is also fueled by the people around us, by our environment.
Thank you, sir. So maybe it's not the challenges, maybe the landscape in Tanzania. You said you went to film school, so I suppose it wasn't in Tanzania.
No.
Okay. But you decided to come back, which is like it's not common.
Yeah.
Because most of the people, when they go to film school, they stay in Europe or the Americas and they don't come back. So maybe the landscape then and now for the Tanzanian film industry, in a very synthetic way.
No, I mean, I don't want to repeat what Sam has said so clearly and articulately, but it's when I came back from film school, again, it was a complete accident that I ended up in film school. But when I came back 9 years ago, that's how long I've spent in the career. The immediate thing for me was that I'm going to find what people are doing, which is a bongo movie scene, the term that's used for the Tanzanian films, and I'm going to join them. And doing film school in the West, I went to Toronto, so even the professors tell you, when you finish your 4 years, go to LA, fail, come back. because you don't want to ever like think, oh, I wish I had tried, making it in Hollywood. And I knew I was coming back, so that wasn't even an option for me. But I had that, that's what you're trained, that's the mentality that, look, if you want to be a cinematographer, start gripping, join the union, 10 years of that. You want to be a director, get coffee, become a PA, work your way up. So when I came back, I said, I'm going to spend 10 years just working on sets and figuring it out and honestly building relationships and solidarity and finding independent filmmakers and see how they work the systems and where are the unions and the guilds and with Bongo movies. 1,500, 2,000 films a year. None of them are crossing borders. Really poor filmmaking. It's quantity over quality. And the worst part, I think, for me was the realization that I'm not here to try and save the industry. That's not what I was planning on doing. So I need to join them and just try and convince people, let's try and do different things. So I applied for a grant immediately. We won, made shoe shine. But what I did is I worked with people. I'm not some unique person who thought of this because I went to Toronto, and everyone in the film industry also wants to do that. But at that time, at that landscape, film is being dictated by the markets, and that's the DVD market we're talking about. So the distributor has signed direct contracts with actors. There is no producer-director. They didn't exist. The actors have become producers by the simple fact that they've signed the contracts. So just by their face showing up on the film or on the DVD cover, their film is distributed. And that distributor owns the markets all the way from Congo to Rwanda, So that was what the films were being defined by that relationship. And once you acknowledge that and you have that and you can articulate that in an argument or in a conversation over a drink or over your tea or whatever, people started changing their mentality, their mindsets. And now when I look at what's happening now, that distributor, because they have these crazy networks, he could sell anything. Now they sell solar power panels. They don't do DVDs anymore. Solar power refrigerators, panels, because they have the network, which means all these filmmakers suddenly are out of work. They don't have any jobs. And now they moved into dubbing or selling Instagram posts, being influencers, but not making films. And that's a very short amount of time for such a significant shift. Insanely significant shift in the landscape. And I think for me, instead of looking at that, and my fellow filmmakers, instead of looking at that as a challenge, we say this is actually extremely exciting because we get to pave a new path, making progressive leftist films, independent ideas, independent approaches, non-professional actors. Literally, I use principles of third cinema to make films, and that's the one that's playing at Century Cinemax in the mall. That's the one that the film board is like, oh, you make good movies, So in a funny way, we end up using like this independent space, independent approach to really attack and overpower mainstream methods of making films. So that's why we have 1,001 challenges, obviously, from everything of exhibition spaces, to cast and crew and skill, but we get to define the new landscape. And that's groundbreaking. It's really exciting, I'm here meeting Sam, meeting you, meeting filmmakers across the board from the region. All day today we talked about sustainability everywhere, at every moment. And it's crazy how we're all on the same page, the same level, even with our different experiences. Whether it's 9 years or 15 years, it doesn't matter.
You're going there. Don't worry, you're making the right moves. Because it's a chance to have you, both of you. You are in the documentary space, you are in the fiction space. So I'd like for us to delve deeper into the creative process. This starts with documentaries because we love documentaries.
With our 20 years experience.
But how do you approach a story when you have like a story? Is it like, usually it comes from your personal reflection, the way you see Kenyan society, or it's just like your life, or you encounter a protagonist, or how do you approach like the storytelling aspect of it?
So in a way, I'm a bit lucky because I've engaged in work as a director and as a producer. So in both of these spaces, I'm able to engage with the stories. We found stories in different ways. So as a director, I have met a protagonist and decided to make something different. And then as we keep
That's the call for prayer. It lasts 30 seconds or 1 minute.
Yeah, but there
It will last about 3 minutes.
because there are other mosques as well.
Okay.
And then continue.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I can like.
But there, si kuna misikiti na si wao moja afu mwingine afu mwingine.
Freezing.
We're surrounded by.
And they don't all call prayer at the same time. 5 minutes later, then 5.
Another one starts.
It's like a train. I'm gonna use the bathroom real quick.
I was like,
Yep.
how long have you been in the industry?
Use the bathroom real quick. It's fine. Alright. I'm using the bathroom. Usinisikilize. Usinirekodi. Ah, una record? Ah, okay.
Hi guys, we believe the call is over.
By the way, this is streaming, huh? Online. They can hear you, everything. It's streaming online.
But yes, it didn't pause?
No.
Did you pause? You paused, right? Can we resume?
How?
Awa?
Yes.
Can we resume?
Yes, please.
Okay, Sam, so we were talking about your process documentary.
Yeah, so I was saying, I feel I've been lucky to engage in the space both as a director and producer, and in those spaces, the stories come in different forms and in different ways. In one way, I've had the engagement of trying to, the activist in us, trying to find a way to make a film with a protagonist that in the process you find there's something deeper, something larger, something greater that you could tell, and that ended up being Softy. And then there's another engagement which I had where I had to build, where there was the idea of something that we wanted to say, but it needed to build the relationship with different protagonists and different people. And in that process, and both in these processes, they take time. They take a lot of time. In one case, it took almost a year. Another case took almost 2 years. And from the producing angle, there's directors and storytellers who want who wanted to say something personal, something they've been feeling, something they're going through, and they want to kind of express it through the medium. And that is the case with the film No Simple Way Home, and there's another mid-length film called What's Eating My Mind that's coming out soon, about a lady who's going through a knowledge of finding out that she has bipolar, and her family finding out as well, and how they deal with it. And I think in all these scenarios and in all these spaces, the key thing in how to, that with all of us, I think both as producers, as a producer and director, that you kind of have to figure out is how to express them in a way that our primary audience can connect with. And primary audience in all of these cases are where the films are made and told. So in Softy, it was Kenyans. In No Simple Way Home, the South Sudanese. In What's Eating My Mind, same thing. It's Kenyans and people who are going through.
But how do you manage to put like limitation, because it could be dangerous, like you could be overthinking what the local audience is, with the taboos, with stuff. How do you manage to deal with that? You know, because thinking about your audiences while in that process could be very tricky and risky.
It's the simplest word I have is true. It's trying to be as honest as possible in what you're creating and how you're making it, not only with yourself but also with who you're making it with. I personally view the people we film as collaborators. I don't view them as this separate entity that we keep them in secret somewhere, that they should not know what we're doing, that kind of thing. I think I view our protagonists, our subjects, as collaborators. So from inception, the conversation of convincing, or the conversation of this is what I'm doing, is a conversation of collaboration. It's like, this is what I am thinking, and they inform what I'm thinking, because they can totally come and like, that is a lie, you are so wrong, you don't even know what you're saying. And you have to be honest to be like, I get it, I hear what you're saying. And when you're hearing, then that's when you're creating. So in that process, I have learned that that's what audiences get attached to, because audiences love that feeling of honesty in the screen. They seeing themselves, the way they could be like, I didn't like this character, but I like this character, and they would even meet the person on the street and be like, so what did they do? Because they feel invested in what's taking place, and that only comes through in a level of honesty which you create in the process of making the film.
Amil, it's a different process when it comes to fiction. Fiction starts with writing. I know in documentary funds like us or Doke or other funds, we ask for narrative proposal writing, but obviously we know that when we go shoot, the reality is totally different, because we're writing from, when we're doing our research, and then we have some information and documents where we know that when we're going to shoot, anything can happen, and usually it happens. But you start with the writing process, and it's a very thorough writing process. How do you go from that and working with, in a landscape where you don't have professional actors? How do you manage that?
You know, it's funny. I mean, obviously, now that I know Sam, we get along so well, even in the way he talks about stuff, because one would assume the differences between the formats, the fiction and the documentary. And as you both mentioned, documentary and the planning, and then everything, just throw it up in the air because, you're filming real life, right? Or in quotations. And fiction staged, script, memorized lines, etc. But I've never made a film or written a character that doesn't exist in real life. Never. Every film, every character I've written, whether it's protagonist or secondary, I can tell you who they are. And sometimes there may be a mix and amalgamation of different people, but I will tell you exactly who they are. And I might not even know them by name, but I remember the nuances, the habits, the responses, where their backstory comes from. And that's always been my process. And
So you're telling us that you use a documentary approach
very much,
to write your character.
very much.
That's very important for filmmakers who are here and listening, and young filmmakers, that you're using that approach to.
Yeah, I know how much you love documentary.
No, but it's very important
Yeah.
because you do have labs or writing workshops with even fiction. I'm talking fiction here.
Yeah.
That the research phase seems to be non-existent. And it's in both genres.
Yeah.
That the research phase, the time that you have to go and look out and read and watch and listen to people seems becoming more and more, frozen, squeezed.
Yeah. I mean, I'm actually shocked when I hear writers, fiction especially, who, write their script and like, yeah, I went away to this lab or to this residency and just sat there for like 6 weeks and wrote this thing. So, but you were alone. Where did you get your characters from? Where did you do your research? Who did you talk to, I'm not obviously saying that that's not the right method, or it's not right or wrong, but I can't ever do that. When I was writing this film, I'm in the midst of the people of Zanzibar. I'm writing it at the stone. I think I might have mentioned earlier or another panel, because I've been on a lot of panels this week. When I was writing Vuta, I was living next to the Culture Tarab group, which is one of the oldest Tarab groups in Zanzibar. And they're rehearsing at 10 a.m., 11 a.m. on Tuesdays and Thursdays. That music is feeding itself into my writing process.
And you can feel that in the film as well.
And when people talk about, the
almost in the whole film.
Exactly.
The first time I watched it, I felt like I was in Zanzibar. I felt like I was the whole Tarab song, the whole film.
And that wasn't even like a conscious thing. It wasn't like a strategy. It was just being with the people, listening to them to play music, seeing them correct each other and make the song better. They're same musicians for at least 50 years, and they still rehearse twice a week and still try and improve their skills and talk to each other. That's what keeps me going. It's what makes me tell the stories, because I'm really pulled towards communities and how communities form and sustain themselves and survive. Because we know, especially people living on the margins, they're constantly just trying to survive. But not in a way that, wipe away your tears and it's a sad story. But those struggles, there's joys in those struggles. There's bonds that are formed. There's family and there's friendship. And I think that for me is other stories that I've always, seen around me. It's why I called my company Kijiweni, which is Swahili for at the stone. It's where all people, it doesn't matter what your background is, what your story is, you come and you hang out and you get the gossip from who's sleeping with whose wife to the political background of the country. Everything happens at the Kijiwe. And I couldn't think of anywhere else where great stories are being told. So it's always like when I start writing, I don't have this moment where I'm like, day 3, okay, I'm starting now. It's been there. It's when you walk from one place to the other, it's the people around you. And then I just spend months and sometimes even years. I have spent, I think, 2 years for Zanzibar and 8 months for Aisha, and it was my entire life for T-Junction, hearing the stories around you and the people, and then further doing research and then building characters and their backstories. And a lot of times, almost in all my films, when the real people that I've pulled from can be brought on set, they come on set. Because I want them to see, this reflection. They need to see, it's not exploitative, it's not extractive, it has to be part and parcel. And I think it's very much a documentary approach.
And I think there's something interesting in terms of how you're speaking, and not only the poetry of the film and how it's reflective of the space in which the story is told. I think it's important to tell stories like that in our space and in our context, because the influence of how we have been conditioned to tell stories has affected the reality in which our audiences experience them. And what I mean by this is we make documentaries and we share them, but we still have audiences calling the subjects in the film actors. and they're like, so did you have to learn lines? I've done interviews where the news people are asking me how did I script, when did they learn their lines, how were they, did they have to cram them? And I'm like, wait, what? But they've been conditioned to believe that the people they're seeing are not real people, that they're not going through real emotion. And that has affected even the storytellers and the filmmakers to make stories and tell stories to have very shallow characters that have like their depth is so little that it's very difficult. So the audience is like, they're just making all these things up. And I think it's important for us to reflect these spaces and allow the stories we tell to kind of just come through on that level.
It's funny because my experience is actually the opposite, where most news people will call my films documentaries. They call my films documentaries. Yeah, because they see something that's believable, right? They've been watching bad Tanzanian films for so long that the idea of a Tanzanian film is obviously fake. You know, the spirit, the ghost, has to look left and right before crossing the road. You know what I mean? Like, this is a very common joke that we make about Bongo movies. Or like the thief takes off his shoes before entering the house. Because you've only got that house for like 10 minutes, so don't make it dirty, you know? So when they watch my films, they call them documentaries.
We should switch.
Yeah, and I'm like, you know that, like, it's fiction, you know, and you have to, but it speaks to one thing, but also the lack of cinematically conscious audiences is another problem. And the other fact that there's this idea that if it's got, you know, if it's clear, it's good sound, it's well made, it has to be a documentary. And they probably think it's going to be about AIDS or mosquito nets or something, or, you know, like
AIDS with mosquitoes.
Exactly, you know.
And disabled people.
Yeah, that's what they're used to seeing. And so I said, but you watched the movie. Why would you use the term documentary? Like, but this is what we know what documentary is. Yeah, so it's really something, huh?
But there's a famous quote that says, "Good fiction film have a documentary feel to them, and a good documentary film."
Like, you shouldn't notice.
Yeah, you think it's fiction.
Yeah, like if you watch good documentary, you should, because in documentary we write in the edit, and the thing about the edit, you're trying to compress 3 years, 4 years, 5 years into 80 minutes, 60 minutes, and in those 80 minutes, someone should not watch it and be like, wait, this was 95, this was so beautiful documentary. You just don't notice that the kids have grown up, that time has moved, and that's powerful.
Amil, before we move to the next point, which is collaboration, because you know, in Eastern Africa, to make the kind of film that you are making and producing, you obviously have to collaborate with on an international level. Could you tell us more about your approach with the acting process? Because basically you're working with non-professionals, and that's very evident in all your films. Those are non-professional actors. How do you handle that?
Well, you know, I was extremely enamored and influenced by third cinema. And, you know, whenever I say that, people who've studied like, oh yeah, 60s, you know, it makes sense for that time. And I truly believe in a new wave of third cinema. I mean, most of the people in this room are part of that new wave in the films that we do. Because what third cinema, the idea behind it was that the resources were not there to make films to compete with first or second world cinema. So then instead of looking at it as a challenge, they embraced it. They embraced it and they made films where you see the boom in the shots. They're not trying to lie to their audiences about making the film, but it doesn't pull away from the story being told and the conversations that were being created. Now, one of the principles was working with non-professional actors. And simply because also there just weren't enough actors. There weren't enough actors to cast into your film. But when they started doing that, the first thing that they realized was not only did they find amazing talent, but when they would go and show the film to those communities, to those spaces, audiences are there speaking to someone that's their neighbor. You know, they're seeing something that's completely new and it feels much more homely, it feels much more familial. So I would read about these things and I said, I have to give it a shot, I have to try what happens. When we made our first film, Shoeshine, we gave it a shot. We had open auditions, and this is coming from a place where the film sector at that time has these famous faces, and if you don't include them in your film, it's like you're not making a movie. We don't know what you're doing. But I say, I'll give it a shot, we'll experiment with it, and we'll find out what happens. We find amazing talent, never acted before, do a little bit of training, have these conversations, realize that the economies of scale don't allow them to pursue careers in acting because they have their full-time jobs. And you show the film, and we actually premiered here at ZIF in 2013, and it wins People's Choice Award at that time. And the number of people who just loved the actors and the characters, that gave me the confidence to keep doing that. Fast forward to all the way to 2019 when I'm casting for Vuta, and now we just have a habit. We do 5 days from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. It doesn't matter if you've acted before, it doesn't matter what your background is, where you're from. We invite you to the audition for 2 reasons. 1, hidden talent, you never know. But 2, to start building this idea of casting and auditions and experimenting with your talents and having the courage and the confidence to actually come out, Because when I made the film Aisha in 2015 in the more rural areas of Tanzania, it's so funny. I was quite young at the time, so I very naive, come from the city, not knowing much about the village life. And we do the first day, and a lot of cast members, a lot of the characters were, middle-aged or older. And they'll show up on time for the audition, and we'll give them the sides, part of the scripts that they have to read. And a lot of them, it started by 1, and then the second one, the third one, they're like, oh, I forgot my glasses. So can I come back tomorrow? I'm like, yeah, sure, we're here for 5 days, not a problem. And then second person, same thing. Oh, I forgot my glasses. The third person. And the second day 2, same thing happens. I'm like, what's going on? Like, what is happening to this town that everyone is forgetting their glasses? And then at the end of day 2, one of our location manager, who's from Pangani, the area, comes to me and is like, you're such a fool. They don't know how to read. They don't know how to read, but they're too embarrassed to tell someone who's a quarter of their age that they can't read. So, when I tell this story, because I tell it often, because it's a real moment of realization for me of how we have to be very fluid in the way we work with our actors and in our industry. Other people would just find the people who know how to read, give them the script, memorize your lines and move on. But we changed our entire system of casting. What we did starting day 3 onwards, and we invited them back, was I would act out the lines and ask them to respond based on how, because this was their characters. Like, how would you change the character? Respond how you would like to, forget about the lines. And we actually, that affected the script. And we added lines to the script. So we started collaborating with them. And Aisha, the casting, the acting in that film is really amazing. Most of them are from Pangani, inside, not even Tanga town. So you have to be able to change your approaches, but the philosophy and the concept behind it has to be one where you're working with the people to tell their stories. It's not your story that you're imposing on them. So that it goes without saying, it's obvious that they're going to be part of the script writing stage, they're going to be part of the casting stage, they're going to be part of the exhibition stage, because it's their story.
Thank you, Amil. I've been told we have 10 minutes left, but I wanted us to touch very briefly on the fact that starting a film for you, Sam, and for you, Amil, in terms of co-production, how do you tackle that, and what are your red flags, briefly, to what extent can you accept international collaboration, and what it brings to the project that you produce for Sophie, for example, or for No Simple Way Home, the latest film that you produce?
Collaboration is inevitable, and it's something we have to do regardless of our situation. And I think what's important, and again, it all comes from lessons learned. It all comes from beginning and engaging in a space where we had parachute crews. People who were like, oh, there's something story here we're making. We're just looking for a local crew to help us for 2 minutes. And then they come with the local crew and they do, the local crew knows everything. So the local crew end up doing everything. And then these people leave and we literally read it on the news, or at least someone shares it on Facebook that it's premiering at Sundance or it's premiering at TIFF. And the local crew is excited because they were part of the thing and they share their work. They're like, you should watch it. And everybody waits to watch this film, which never comes, probably comes a year later. And when they're watching it, there's the directed by, edited by, cinematography by all the people who came, the parachute people who came, and there's like Kenyan crew. In the end credits, at the end, when the people have left,
Yeah.
they're not Stephen. So, and that has happened to us, and it was such a painful experience. And going through that, plus even when they go to the awards, it's, you know, they're like, we want to come with our Kenyan collaborators, but then the Kenyan collaborators arrive,
Doesn't have a visa.
and they're like, what, where? They don't know where they're staying. They don't know. You're making phone calls. You're like, let's ask the Kenyan embassy to help us. Like, people have gone through such traumatic experiences in those collaborations, so we had to learn from that. And for us, any collaboration has to stand and be founded on respect. And I think a mutual respect and understanding that, yes, we may not be on the same technical level, but we have to respect each other. You may be the originator of the idea, but I too am worth my salt. So it's pushing for not only recognition of the teams and the people that you're working with, that's on one level, but pushing on for compensation on the same level. So that's one factor that's big in terms of collaboration and something that people should look out for. And you know, I'm not saying you should fight with the people you're working with. I think it's just the human thing to do. The other thing is looking at what's important for the project. Like, not all money is good money. And not all collaborators are good collaborators. Depending on what you want to do with the project, like depending on what you want to achieve. A very simple example is everybody loves to have a streamer for their project, but you also want to do impact for your project. When you're engaging with some streamers, they would be like, they can't give you those rights. It's either on their platform or not. So you have to be honest, like, what do you want to achieve with the project? So perhaps the streamer might not be the best partner or collaborator with your project, and you have to take a different direction. And that's okay. Like, it's not something that should not view it as the end of your film career and be like, now this is done. So it's important to view the people that are out there and the people you're talking to in terms of the benefits of the project, and also the benefits of you as the filmmaker. If say I'm a producer and I'm working with a director, is what are the aspirations of this director? What do they want to achieve? What do they want to learn? Because another thing is, because of the lack of resource and the space we're in, every single call that comes out, people apply to. Like, you have a call that's climate change, you're in. You have a call that's about saving turtles, you're in. You're like applying the same project. And because of the lack of resource, I think there's a level of understanding that, again, all the workshops, all the trainings, all the funding, all those things have to be strategically viewed and have to be strategically engaged with. So those are just a few things that are kind of like to look out for in terms of collaboration.
Thank you, Sam. That was very comprehensive.
I'll just add that you always have to think about intention and purpose, always. I mean, from development stage to exhibition, it's always about that, especially for filmmakers based on the continent, because we are on the outskirts of the industries, the global industry. It's become sexy right now to have an African co-production because it opens up doors for funding, it's an easier sell to investors, it's an easier sell to distributors, especially with what the streamers are doing, where they're trying to open up doors here so that they can increase their subscribers. So we have to be conscious of that. And again, that's not to say don't do it. By all means. But what is your purpose with this project? What is the intent? If you're making this film in order to be able to get on a major platform so that it's a stepping stone for you, or it's a career movie, by all means, go ahead and collaborate with someone that will just make sure everything is audited, all the finances are good, and all the deliverables will be made. But if the purpose is to make sure this film plays in secondary schools across the country and starts conversations in villages, or is used to educate the political elite who are completely blindfolded by what's happening in front of them, then maybe that's not the route that you need to take. Maybe you need to think about working with a collaborator or a producer who is able to open up those doors for you. And maybe it's not even that your typical traditional film producer. Might be working with somebody who's in a different field. We have to be fluid. We have to be able to work with things that serves the film and not some of our own intentions. I mean, look, playing at the A-list festivals is nice. Flying off to Toronto and red carpets and getting the Getty Images logo. It's nice. Come on, right? It's fun and it's nice. And for a second you're like, maybe I made it. But the reality is that what did you make the film for? And anyone who watches the film and any audience member, I mean, they're no fools. They realize it. We understand that was a career film. That was a career move, and that film has honesty in it, and it's showing for the people, and it's going to have impact. I mean, Softy will play for years, and will always carry a message of humanity and of struggle and of finding ways to break the system. And I've watched it twice already, and I can't wait to watch it again. So I think those kind of stories are important, and we have to think about that when we're collaborating.
Thank you, Amil. Thank you, Sam. I think we have time for one or two questions. The first question is always the most difficult one. Yes.
I was wondering, both of you have a production company. As a filmmaker, would you have made your own production company to make the first feature, or is it something you can push down the line? What's the first step?
I think you don't need a production company to make a film. I would say that. Just primarily because I think the reason why a lot of people feel like they have to have production companies is because, again, we exist in a very traumatized art space. Like, a lot of storytellers and filmmakers have so much trauma they're carrying, and one of the consequences of that is them forming their own production company. I think what filmmakers should push for more is understanding, I think, what Amil was talking about. What do they want? What is important to them? If you want to make money, be honest with yourself. You want to make money. Don't front that you are like, I really want to fight climate change.